Happy Friday there, good people. Welcome to Stir Crazy, episode number 71, First Nation Friday. Yeah, it is that time again where we sit around and discuss different news and events that are going on around the Indian country. Because guess what? You live in Indian country. I live in Indian country. This is stolen land that we reside on. And there is a whole lot that still happens very much within the Native American community. And I love these conversations because it really gives non-natives such as myself, such as probably majority of you, an opportunity to understand the Native American struggle, but not only that, but the experience of Indigenous people on this continent in the year 2020 as they persevere through hundreds of years of white supremacist and colonialist fuck shit. And yet they are still here, baby, still standing strong, 10 toes down. You best believe it. Listen, coming up on the agenda today, we are going to continue to explore the ramifications, the ongoing ripples from the landmark Supreme Court decision, McGirt v. Oklahoma, that restored Native sovereignty to many tribes in Oklahoma, but now there is a lack of transparency about how these decisions and agreements are being made. We're going to discuss that. Also, a tragic story coming out of Canada, where in Ontario, 11 Indigenous children have succumbed to COVID in a very short amount of time, and their communities are extremely concerned. COVID-19 is doing tremendous damage across Native country in both the US and Canada, and it certainly still deserves very much our attention. And what also deserves a lot of scrutiny has been the federal response to the needs of Native American people during this global pandemic. But what they didn't need was a visit from some damn Melania Trump. But damn if Melania Trump didn't show up and give a very, I don't even know how to say, I can't even describe her speech regarding Native children, but we will get a listen and a sampling of that. And of course, we always want to hear from you, the viewers, the customers, in the chats, in the comments. Drop them on in there. We're going to get to them. We love to hear from you. You can always email us, stircrazy@therealnews.com. But it's time to bring in our fantastic panel. Three of my favorites. Actually, now 3 of my favorite follows on Twitter. Let me just add that in there too. If you're not following these strong women, you need to be following them right now. Go on and click that follow button. We are joined today with Jen Deerenwater, Desiree Kane, and Johnny J, activists, journalists, authors in their own right. And now our panel on First Nation Fridays. Ladies, this is our 4th or 5th. Is this our 5th episode of First Nation Fridays? I think it's 5.
I don't know.
I think it's.
I have no idea. I'd have to go look.
I know we have such a good conversation and we're not even keeping track. We just rolling with it. Mm-hmm. But I love this because guess what, guys? So before we did the show, I actually had the opportunity to interview doctors and professors Trisha Rose and Cornell West, and I told them about this program, and they seemed so interested because I'm not going to say there's not a space for discussion of Native issues. I'm sure that there is, but I don't know what they are. And but I'm definitely interested in them. But the fact that, we're creating a space here, I think is very, very important. And I hope we can expand it in the future. Hint, 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 hint. But ladies, let's go ahead and get started with the Supreme Court decision, McGirt v. Oklahoma. It's something that we discussed on our previous program. But there has been a lot of developments since then. Johnny J, I want you to take us away. What is going on with the issue of Native sovereignty in the state of Oklahoma?
Well, originally, once the ruling came out, the 5 civilized tribes in the state of Oklahoma had said that they were dedicated to working together to make sure that there wasn't a lot of chaos or disruption in the legal system in regards to that ruling. However, now that a couple of weeks have passed and, the state of Oklahoma released a press release saying that, the tribes had reached an agreement and that they were laying the framework for how they were going to move forward after the McGirt ruling. But the Muskogee Creek and the Seminole Nations announced Friday that their tribes were not on board with the proposed agreement. And their main concern is basically that the way that the new legislation is worded, they would be ceding their sovereignty to the state of Oklahoma. So that was something that was a main concern, especially when we talked about the last time. We did talk about how this did seem like a short-lived victory because, of course, with the wording that they used in the opinion, until Congress says otherwise, we knew that this wasn't going to be the end of the story. So there is a lot of discussion about what's going to happen now. And one of the things that has come out in light of this is that the people that had been working on this legislation before the ruling was determined are bound by a non-disclosure agreement. So nobody really knows who is working on this legislation, whether or not they are with the tribes or have Native representation at all. So that is a main concern that's going on right now. I believe there was a protest at the Cherokee Nation headquarters regarding this. And a lot of the citizens of the Cherokee Nation were saying that their voices needed to be heard in this, and that the legislation regarding the tribe shouldn't move forward until the citizens themselves were consulted and their voices heard, in kind of trying to lay this framework, because, you know, it's not just keeping up the old systems and trying to make sure that it moves undisrupted, especially now with people discussing defund police and, you know, this movement to abolish the police state. So there is a lot of discussion that is going on. But right now, the main concerns are that the 5 civilized tribes would be ceding their sovereignty to the state of Oklahoma, which is, you know, just not something
some bullshit. That sounds like some bullshit. Like, how are you going to cede the sovereignty? You just got the sovereignty back. Now, one of you guys, I can't remember which one, but you had posted on Twitter that the person appointed, I believe, to oversee this process by the governor of Oklahoma was not even a Native person, just a regular old white person overseeing this process. Do I have that right or wrong?
I believe you have that absolutely right. It's getting messy. You know, Oklahoma right now, there is a lot of turmoil because the governor of Oklahoma is very anti-Native. And recently, there has been a lot of turmoil regarding the tribal gaming compacts in the state of Oklahoma. A lot of the tribes have banded together to create a lawsuit against the governor in regards to him not honoring the gaming compacts that exist now and trying to change them. My tribe, the Otomazura and the Comanche tribe, actually went behind the rest of the tribe's backs and signed their own compacts with the governor. And just recently, the Oklahoma Supreme Court ruled that those compacts were not legal because the governor overstepped his boundaries in creating a new compact without the okay of the legislation itself, with kind of just, you know, not going through the chain of command to making sure that everything was legal and legit. So those compacts are now considered voided. So there is a lot of discussion regarding that. And that just kind of fuels what's going on with McGirt. There is a lot of anger right now in Indian country, in Oklahoma, just because, you know, everything seems to be coming against the tribes full force. And because Governor Stitt, I don't know if you are familiar with him, but he is like a mini Trump. And it's just really bad right now. There's just so much turmoil within the tribes, like making sure that we are getting what we need, that things are fair for the tribes. And so it's a mess right now. It really is. And especially now with COVID and the funds hitting Indian country, you know, that's another discussion that's coming up for debate right now. But in regards to, you know, the gaming compacts, McGirt, it all has to come down to this really struggle of power between the state of Oklahoma and the tribes, because Oklahoma wants to kind of take that sovereignty. They're kind of they're not honoring the relationship that we once had. And it wasn't great, but at least we were able to work together to compromise and to try to find a middle ground. But now it's, it's almost like their way or the highway. And of course, the tribes are going to be the ones losing out on this.
Jen, Deerin Oklahoma is your old stomping grounds. I mean, is this the case of, grand opening, grand closing, and natives had sovereignty for like 2 weeks, and now, the rug has been snatched from underneath them, or it's definitely more complicated than that?
I think it's much more complex than that, as is just about any topic you're going to talk about in regards to Native people. The answer is always complex. So I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. So I have been keeping an eye on McGirt, which originally was, the Murphy case last Supreme Court session, and, then McGirt and all of these dealings and things. So within Cherokee Nation, there's a lot of anger right now that I think is justifiable towards the way our principal chief Hoskins has been handling things in some of the tribal council. I personally, I feel very torn. On the one hand, I think tribes need to be at the table for every single discussion that is about us and about issues happening on our lands. Now, on the other hand of that, I'm worried that these McGirt dealings might turn into some of our tribes willingly handing over our sovereignty. And that's unconscionable to me. I can't even believe that this is a conversation that anyone in Cherokee Nation leadership is having right now, that this is even a thought in their minds. Some of our Cherokee relatives have been comparing this to the Treaty of New Echota, which was the treaty that a lot of Cherokees say is responsible for our removal, which was the trail where they cried, which forced us from our ancestral lands to Oklahoma. One very, very small group of Cherokee people were behind that treaty and signed that treaty. The vast majority of Cherokees, however, did not want to be removed. We wanted to stay on our lands. But the federal government did what it wanted. Andrew Jackson was hell-bent on getting us off our lands. And it feels a little bit like that's kind of what's happening now. It's kind of like a taking away of our sovereignty without the full voices, the full opinions of all of us who are collectively part of Cherokee Nation. And I'm really concerned.
Well, let me hop in here just because I want to get some clarity, because I'm trying to figure out, understand what the concerns are, because you said that the Cherokee are in Oklahoma are unhappy with the leadership because it sounds as though they're trying to give away sovereignty. Explain to me what do you mean? What do you mean by that? What is exactly on the table, and what are the concerns of the tribal members that the tribal leadership is doing?
So I should say that not every citizen of Cherokee Nation is necessarily angry, but there is a large enough and vocal enough group within Cherokee Nation that is raising concerns. One of the concerns with the McGirt dealing is that our tribe might willingly give over sovereignty to the state of Oklahoma to prosecute Native people on Native lands. And so that would essentially kind of undo what we got under McGirt, which was a ruling basically saying that we can prosecute Native people on our lands, and the state of Oklahoma doesn't have that right. And while this is really crucial when you consider that Native people have the highest rates of incarceration in this country, and that Oklahoma is actually the world's prison capital, it incarcerates the most people in the United States, which is already a country that incarcerates the most people in the entire world. Oklahoma has the second highest Native population in this country. So one, I think it's really important that we're not allowing the white man to round up and arrest and throw more of our people in cages. But two, no other entity should have a right to come into our sovereign lands and oversee anything that we do. And that includes with criminal and justice related issues. And so that's kind of what's at the heart of this. But anytime, and I want to also stress this, while I believe very strongly in tribal sovereignty, and I believe in the right of tribal nations to make the decision on what they need, that inherent right to self-determination. But what every tribe does still impact other tribes, kind of like Johnny pointed out with the gaming compact, and I get concerned also because Cherokee Nation is the largest federally recognized tribe in this country. We have a lot more power and money and resources than some of the smaller tribes. And it worries me that Cherokee Nation leaders might not only do things that are not in the best interest of Cherokee Nation citizens, but that could really impact and hurt other tribal nations. And I personally have reached out to both of my tribal counselors and expressed my concerns with this.
Desiree, listening to Jen and Johnny's concerns about some of the decisions that maybe some of the tribal leadership is making to perhaps give up some sovereignty back to the state, in effect erasing the court victory that was just achieved. I think about my own community in the Black community where a common phrase amongst us is all skin folk ain't your kinfolk. and just because, we happen to share the same skin color does not mean that our interests are aligned. Is that also the case amongst Indian leadership, in your opinion, where
it can be.
Mm-hmm. Is there like a Native American equivalent to like Candace Owens? Is there like a Native Candace Owens there where she starts talking is like, oh my God, not this.
I immediately think of the Native folks that are willing to be tokenized by the Washington football team, and say that they were pro-Redskins. But it also, as I was listening to Jen speak, I was thinking about so the relationship with California tribes is a lot different when it comes to treaty, but it's important as Native people that we reinforce the Cherokee people's protocols that they have in place. And it sounds to me like because there's some disagreements with the Cherokee community that, some of those things, some of our systems aren't so easily understood by non-Native people, right? So some of our kinship systems, some of the leadership systems, and there's some internal Cherokee Nation things that nation of people needs to address. But ultimately, since I'm not a member of one of those tribes, that I just reinforce the Cherokee right to their sovereignty to figure out their processes, their protocols, because ultimately, tribal sovereignty does need to be reinforced because it impacts so many people across all of Indian country. But yeah, it can be. There's folks who want to be paid off and, they're fine with being tokenized, or they're fine identifying with the mascots. They're fine to be paraded around for weird colonizer issues. Of course, there's capitalists across every diaspora of people.
Absolutely. Johnny and Jen, so what is at stake here in terms of what the next steps are? Are there ongoing discussions between the 5 civilized tribes in Oklahoma about what to do next? And To what extent is the governor's office involved in these negotiations? Are they driving these negotiations?
I think that's one of the questions that remains to be answered, is who exactly is driving this legislation, because the people involved are held by a non-disclosure agreement, so nobody knows. Nobody knows for sure, is there a tribal member? Are there representatives from the five civilized tribes actually working on the legislation, or is the state coming to the tribes with the legislation and asking for approval on it? So I think that's one of the questions that really needs to be answered right now. And as far as like, are the tribes discussing what steps we need to take next? Absolutely. It's always going to be a push and shove. We are sovereign nations. We're not a monolith. So each tribe is going to have their own opinion and own way of how they view how we move forward and how we exercise our sovereignty. And I think that's one of the things that makes it more difficult, because, when it comes to Native people, for some reason, we're the only people that people expect us to be in 100% agreement on everything. Whether it's mascots, whether it's sovereignty, whether it's gaming, they want us to be 100% across the board on the same page. And of course, as with any people, that's never going to be the case. So there is going to be a lot of heated discussions regarding this. I believe that, it may test some of the relationships that our tribal governments have with each other. But ultimately, I do believe that they will continue to work together to try and find a way forward, because there is a lot at stake. It's not just the Cherokee Nation. It's not just the Creek Nation. It's not just the Cherokee or the Seminole or the Chickasaw. It's all of the tribes in Oklahoma that are going to be impacted by, the ruling and what moves forward. Because if we cede our sovereignty, if we give them just that tiny bit, it's not going to be enough. And eventually they will keep coming back and keep coming back for more and more and more until we have no sovereignty left. And as it is, when it comes to business dealings in Indian country, for the most part, when our tribal nations deal with non-native entities or need investments, or non-native businesses want to have a business on native land, a lot of the times what happens is that native tribes will have to waive their sovereignty in order for those businesses to operate on tribal land. And what that does is it means that once the tribes are in these agreements, once they sign those contracts, they are bound to them. And if at any point, say the company is a shady business and it ends up hurting the tribe, because they have signed away their sovereign rights, that business can turn around and sue the entire tribe for breach of contract. And so that's what's at stake. Natives are already in court all the time, and there's a lot of tribes who have been taken advantage of by predatory industries like the payday loan business. That is one huge problem in any country right now, because they do tend to prey on smaller tribes who are really poverty stricken and desperate. And they go in, they prey on them. And at the end of the day, because of the way that these industries operate and because of the regulations that states have now in regards to payday loan services, it ends up putting the tribes in court. And because of the way that those agreements are made, because those sovereign rights have been waived, the tribes are on the hook for the financial cost of battling this in court. So if you're already an impoverished tribe and you're taken to court, you're sued because of this, you're on the hook for not only, the cost of the legal dealings, but also if they rule against you, you're also going to be on the hook for paying those fines. And so that just creates more debt, more poverty. And so that's what's at stake when we talk about waiving sovereignty, when we're ceding our sovereignty, because we're already expected to do that in so many other ways just in order to have a working economy. So that is something that has really come to light, I think, in the last couple of years, as more of our tribal nations have really worked to grow their own economies in order to become more self-sustainable, because we do have some really wealthy tribes. Actually not all five civilized tribes, the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, and the Choctaw those three tribes have, I believe at the last time I saw it, their operating budget was 5 times more than the state of Oklahoma. So they're very wealthy. And like Jen says, the wealthier tribes hold a lot of more power. The Navajo Nation, we have a lot of really wealthy tribes that have a lot of power. So it is worrisome when the decisions that they make don't line up with the rest of Indian country's best interest, because, like Desiree said, it does impact so many people. So I think that's one of the things that makes all of this just so complex and makes it hard for people, especially non-Native people, to really understand how Indian country operates.
We have a question actually from the comments. Schultze 100, we appreciate the love, Schultze. They say, interesting stuff. Are the Comanche the original people of Oklahoma? I remember that the Cherokee Nation is there. Ladies, any insights on the origins of the Comanche people?
Yes, they are indigenous to Oklahoma, and pretty much most of the Southwest as well, down into Mexico.
Everywhere, there's no state lines, right? Indian country is stateless, as it were. Well, speaking of Indian country, I think there was a welcome or unwelcome visitor to Cherokee land in the form of First Lady Melania Trump. Who invited Melania out, y'all? That's what I want to know. What did Melania have to say to the people of the Cherokee Nation? Well, let's take a look.
Many of you have traveled far, but I'm grateful that you have made time to be with us today and carry out the work the President asked you to do as member of the task force on protecting Native American children in the Indian Health Service system. One of the pillars of my Be Best initiative is children well-being, and when I look around this room, I see so many people who have made the well-being of children their life's work. As you know, the Indian Health Service is an important part of America's healthcare, and I know that many IHS staff are passionate about their mission and the communities they serve. However, systematic problems can put children at risk, and I share the President's commitment to making sure the Indian Health Service uses best practices to keep children safe. Native American children, like all children, deserve to grow up in a safe, supportive, nurturing environment. Strong Native American communities are strong American communities. I look forward to learning about your work and what you have found, and I thank you again for your willingness to ask difficult questions in order to protect.
Yeah, it's kind of rich to hear Melania Trump almost lecture an audience of natives talking about y'all need to use best practices when it comes to the children. Make sure the federal government is cutting the check, Melania. That's a good place to start. Make sure these people get their money and exponentially double, triple, quadruple it. Jen, why? Why was she there? I mean, I'm sure this is obviously a political move. I know it would behoove Indian country to have a good relationship with the White House in order to facilitate, the expediting of necessary resources. But when you see the wife of this right-wing authoritarianism president, white supremacist president, white nationalist president, come and talk about how concerned they are for the care of Indian children, what is your reaction?
I can tell you, watching that video, I could feel like my stomach literally just tightening up and my whole body getting tense. And I can like feel the rage coursing through my body right now. Okay.
Right? It's like,
I mean, first, honestly, that's the first time I've ever heard Melania speak, ever. I had no idea what her voice sounded like, anything. So I feel like it's kind of interesting that this is literally the first time that I am hearing her. Granted, I have not made any attempts to follow her in what she's doing, but it's the first time I've heard her speak, and it's about Native children. Like, get the fuck out of here. You don't know anything about us. You don't care about us. Your husband doesn't care about us. I mean, Trump has done so much harm to Native people long before he ever got into office. All the racist fucking shit he did towards some of the northeastern tribes around casinos, saying that if we have casinos on the res, that our tribal leaders will be in cahoots with the mafia, that we don't look like real Indians. I mean, this man is vile. He's vile. He does not give a damn about us. If you really cared about Native children, one, you wouldn't be stealing us from our families, whether it's at the border with indigenous migrant children being taken from their families and put in ICE detention centers, or it's our youth being taken from their families and put into foster homes or, white Christian adopted homes, it just group homes, the prison industrial complex. Our children are incarcerated at ungodly rates. In Minnesota, Native girls are incarcerated at 18 times the rate of white girls. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, says that Native people actually suffer the highest rates per capita of police brutality. If you cared about Native children, you'd be fixing these problems. This is what you would be doing. You would work on this. You would make sure that we had clean running water, that there wasn't a digital divide so that our children can have a good education, including right now under this pandemic when they can't be in their schools. You would make damn sure we have roads, that we have good, strong health care. There's so much that they would be doing if they cared. They wouldn't be trying to put pipelines through our lands, through our backyards. They wouldn't turn a blind eye when our people go murdered and missing. They wouldn't care that the parents of children are going murdered and missing, or being locked up in prisons and jails and families torn apart. If you cared about Native children, you'd be working on that. And it infuriates me that Principal Chief Hoskins is welcoming Melania Trump to our lands. I understand that our tribal leaders are in a very precarious position where they have to always balance what we really need and what's really just versus what the U.S. government will actually do. And I don't envy them being in that position. There's no way you could ever get me to run for tribal office, really any political office, because let's be real, I'm way too mouthy for that. But I'm livid. I'm livid. Like, why is this woman coming to our lands? Why are we welcoming her with open arms? I'm going to stop there before I say some things I can't take back.
That's okay. That's okay. Desiree is right there waiting to take that baton, babe. Desiree, we know that the United States government has been shit towards Indian people forever. But given some of the things that Jen just outlined, it sounds as though the Trump administration, at least in modern times, is uniquely bad towards Native people. And to have Melania Trump arrive and, I want you all to be best. Like, what? What is your thoughts seeing the First Lady address Indian country and specifically talk about Indian children?
To be honest, I'm just as equally enraged and disgusted as Jen, because I watched that and the whole thing just reeks of like performative allyship of white women who actually reinforce this weird hetero Christian patriarchy thing that believes natives are savage, right? So of course we need their guidance and their leadership. And I watch that and I just want to throw up. And part of me is like, you keep your grubby mitts off of our children. the United States government has historically snatched children like in the middle of the night and put like kids into boarding schools out of homes. That happened in my family, not that long ago. So, and it's happening now to like the families that are at Camp Free Them All, who are camped outside, in solidarity, holding vigil for their relatives who have been snatched out of their families and put into the Geo detention facility in Aurora, Colorado. So I just watched that and I'm like, you stay away, you wench. And she's a woman. And I'm like, ugh. So I don't know. I find it very frustrating. And I don't think that she's our friend at all. I think that Trump has been so harmful. And I think she is not ignorant to how he is. She rubs his back and like it's his life. So at a certain point, she knows what he's up to and she's a pawn in the game. So sometimes I watch her speak and I'm like, Melania, blink 4 times if you need us to come get you. But then, I don't know, I just have a lot of cognitive dissonance around Melania Trump, but I also know she needs to stay away from our kids. Just stay away. She just needs to stay away.
Oh, trust me, that we all know the plantation owner's wife was just as culpable as the plantation and slave owner himself, Johnny J. In the comments, Jane Elliott Jr. says, I hope someone shows Melania y'all's takedown of this lame little speech. Who knows why they put her up to it? What does this achieve politically, Johnny J., in your opinion? Because certainly Donald Trump is not carrying any significant portion of the Native American electorate come this November's election. And I'm trying to figure out what the angles are here. Like, who benefits from Melania Trump's visit and her little speech? Is it the tribe itself? Is it the Cherokee Nation that could ultimately benefit? Are the Trumps trying to benefit? I'm having a hard time putting this together.
You know what? I'm going to read you a quote in regards to McGirt. When people were asking Hoskin why he was ceding their sovereignty, in response to that, he said, we know from our history, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. The Cherokee Nation is not going to be on the menu as long as I'm chief. That is a very, very telling of where his mindset is. And it's also something that we've seen. And given that our nation right now is just falling into a fascist state, I can honestly see why a lot of tribes would be trying to jump hoops in order to stay on Trump's good side. Because we have seen him already in just this first 4 years go after several tribes in land grabs. He tried to de-establish the Wampanoag people as a federally recognized tribe in order to take their land. We've already seen him come after us. And so I think that given that we really don't have any good political choices right now, like we have Trump, we have Biden, both of them suck. Both of them really suck. And, I think a lot of people may have already given up and may have already think that, we're going to be stuck with another 4 years of Trump because, regardless of what happens in the election in November, he has been so enabled by the Republicans and by his followers to just chuck the rules, to not follow any kind of standard or protocol. He does his own things and people allow him to. So I think a lot of people, especially some of our native tribes, are trying to be preemptively on the good side of his mindset. I think they're willing to, jump through whatever hoop he asks them to in order for them to feel safe. And we've already seen and known that the 5 civilized tribes have done this as means of survival. We've seen it from the very beginning, right before the Trail of Tears even. A lot of the 5 civilized tribes had been pretty assimilated. A lot of people think that when the Trail of Tears happened, we were just poor Native people leaving our homes. But, you know, a lot of our communities were very rich. They weren't leaving just, you know, traditional homes. They were leaving huge plantations. They were leaving cities, because that's how assimilated the 5 tribes had become for the most part. Like, you know, there were several people who didn't fall in that line, communities who did their best to not fall into that. But there were a lot of communities that did. And a lot of it was because they didn't want to be annihilated. They thought if they could just be like the settlers, they would be okay. They would be left alone. And for the most part, that's also what they were promised. But then, as we all saw, you know, when it came time for removal, it didn't matter how white they acted, or how obedient, or how compliant, or, you know, how just accommodating they were. They were removed too, because they were still natives. And so I think we're going to see a lot more of that with our tribes. Just because there's a lot of fear right now. And, you know, it's a terrible, terrible thing. But, you know, when you look at Native survival, a lot of our ancestors had been forced to do terrible things in order to survive. And, you know, and it doesn't justify it. It doesn't make it right. But, you know, we never really know how we're going to react in a situation until we're put in it. And I think, you know, now we're starting to, just the entire world, you know, there's been so many atrocities in the past that we've learned about in school that we are like, how did this happen? How did Nazis overtake Germany? How were, you know, the Jewish people put in concentration camps? Why did nobody stand up to that? How did nobody stop this? But, you know, we're starting to see history repeat itself. And people are doing the same thing. We're allowing it bit by bit, piece by piece. We're starting to be okay with normalized racism. We're starting to be okay with federal police coming in and snatching people off the streets, because we find ways to justify that. And that's what's happening now. And, you know, it's terrible. And I hate that our Native nations are put in that position again, because we are at a very, in a very vulnerable position. And a lot of tribes don't have the means. And when you don't have the means, you're going to be more apt to make desperate decisions in order just to survive. And I really, really hate that, because it's just something that we see over and over and over, and it never ends well for us. You know, we haven't really learned from our history either. So it's infuriating. You know, it's senseless, it's infuriating. And, you know, as people, I really just wish we would all just kind of wake up, because we're all complicit in this. When we allow just little bitty bits to slip by, when we start justifying, you know, just these tiny bits of injustice, when we start justifying, when we start making it okay or making excuses for it, we become complicit. So you look at the world that we're in right now, the situation that the U.S. is in now. And as much as a lot of us resist, as much as a lot of people work to try and make it better, you know, we are still complicit in so many other little ways. And it's just a terrible situation that we're in. And I just don't even know how to reconcile or even wrap my head around it, because, you know, it's just, I think at this point for me, and I think for a lot of people, it's overwhelming, because we don't see an end to the injustice. We don't see an end to this fascist nation that's coming into power. We don't see an end to it. And everybody's just working as hard as they can. And we have COVID, we have unemployment, we have so many things that are just inundating the people right now. And everyone is just overwhelmed and just trying to do the best they can. And it really sucks, because in that desperation, there's going to be a lot of bad decisions made. There's going to be a lot of bad policy that's going to be allowed to slip by, just because we feel like it's necessary in order to survive.
Gang, I want us to switch gears. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Desiree. By all means, hop in.
Sure. You know, when Johnny talks about complicity, and you ask, well, who does her making these statements serve? she's speaking to Trump's complicit base, who is going to look at that. They're not going to challenge it. They're going to be like, oh, look at Melania Trump. She's out there helping the Indians. Like, I didn't even know that they existed anymore. That's so sweet. Oh. So that's who she's messaging to, is actually deep within Trump's base of people who won't challenge what they know or see about Native people. They're just bought 100% into the system, and she's like, it's really good because she's working on, you know, Native issues. So when, you know, people talk about who's complicit, that's who's actually benefiting from messaging like this from Melania Trump, is the complicit base deep within Trump's camp.
Well, as we look around the country and still see these ongoing protests and uprisings, Portland has gained the national spotlight over the past couple of weeks. There have been, I think, over 55 days of sustained daily and nightly protests, most notably the white moms and the white dads getting tear gassed. I'm not laughing at that. I'm just laughing because it's like, oh, look at the moms. It's like, oh, as if Black and Native moms and Latinx moms have not always been out in these streets advocating for justice and equality, but that's another topic. But I did want to highlight the speech of an activist there. Her name is Lilith Sinclair. She gave a very impassioned acknowledgement about indigenous land rights during one of these Black Lives Matter speeches in Portland. And I did want us to play it. It's lengthy. And Dwayne, I know that the clip is like 3 minutes long. We may cut it in half just for time wise, but let's run a solid 90 seconds of what she has to say, and then we'll take it from there.
Hi, everyone. As many of you know, my name is Lilith Sinclair. I am an Afro-Indigenous, non-binary local organizer here in Portland, organizing for the abolition of not just the militarized police state, but also the United States as we know it. I want to make sure that while we are standing here on stolen land, we make sure to do a land acknowledgement. So, I'm here today to remind the people on this land who the original keepers of the land were and still are. What is now Portland, Oregon, has a rich history since time immemorial. Many tribes lived here, including the Multnomah, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, and Molalla. Also, please remember to include the Willamette Tumwater and the Watlala for people who historically lived here. Also, the Tualatin Kalapuya are one people, a band of the Kalapuya people who lived in the Portland area. Many more tribes traded here, including the Wasco, Warm Springs, Yakima Silex. This area was a trading spot. Tribes from all along the Columbia River, all the way from the start of the river in Canada to the mouth of the river along the Pacific Ocean and along all the Columbia River tributaries and up the coast would come here and trade cloth, beads, coins, shells, medicine, food, music, dance, and language. Families and tribes would join together in a marriage, would sit and share meals together, tell stories, and pray together. This has been going on since before anyone can remember. When the colonizers who created the state of Oregon and the city of Portland and surrounding cities came, they saw us not as people, but as wild animals. They enacted a genocide against the people here, killing us using physical weapons such as guns or fists, mental weapons such as boarding schools and Christianity, and biological weapons such as smallpox and other diseases. The goal was to eradicate us as we were on the land and the colonizers wanted the land for themselves. They have continued to do things like kidnapping children and not allowing people to practice their culture without severe punishments, including death, making our religions and customs illegal, providing us with false health care, forcing us onto reservations with poor access to our ancestral food, or any food at all for that matter, and killing so many of us that often what is left is a mere memory. These are facts that we as Indigenous people have to live with every minute of every day of our entire lives. I'm here today not just to honor our ancestors and those who have been lost, but to remind all people, and especially white people, of the violent history of the land you are on. You are here today.
Powerful words right there from Sister Lilith. Desiree, we know that that's out in your part of the woods, so to speak. Talk to us about what's happening in Portland. You know, what has been in the news is that people are like, oh, federal agents are disappearing protesters from off the streets. Yes, absolutely terrible. But did you know that the federal government has been disappearing Indigenous and Black folks and Latinx folks for way longer than they've been disappearing white protesters? That's just my 2 cents. Desiree Kane, let me hear from you.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think it's interesting. I've been watching what's been happening in Portland pretty closely. It's pretty triggering, having been out at Standing Rock, to see mercenaries also militarized alongside federal agents. I think that the Native community offers a lot of insight into what is going on right now. You know, the police force is one way that dictators often enforce their position. And so as we're watching the rise of fascism within the Trump administration, it's important that we really keep our eyes on those police, but also keep our eyes on the mercenaries. I think that there's a lot of people who are enraged right now because this is the first time that snatching white people off of the street of Portland, in a state that started as a whites-only state, now they're enraged. But like you said, you know, they've been snatching people since 1492. So they've disappeared people off of entire continents. So, you know, it's really important if we want to battle Trump, if we want to have a police force that, well, one, it should be abolished, but we have to reject what we're seeing. The power of the camera is one thing that at Standing Rock really provided some small vestige of safety for people who were there. And I think that that's going to start happening now as well, is people are becoming enraged and demanding justice because of this social media, and because we're all now empowered to make our own media, you know, citizen media. I watch with growing concern because I saw what happened with Tiger Swan and Standing Rock, with the federal and private working together to brutalize people. That's been going on. You know, I think about the mom and the undocumented mom in Oakland who was like ripped apart from her kid and taken by ICE agents. Like, these things have been going on for years and years and decades and like hundreds of years. So it's important to watch what we're seeing and look to the Native community to really understand the way that the system is going to be maneuvering. So they've already started taking children, they rip apart women, both our bodies, our communities, they rip mothers away from families. But I am really worried because it's been weaponized against Americans. But I'm also proud to see the moms, the white moms on the front lines, because police are less likely to brutalize a white mom or a dad with a, you know, what was it, a lawn blower to blow away the tear gas. That's all very constructive. We need white people to weaponize that privilege, that white privilege, and put yourself in the way, because it is 100% proven that when a police officer is about to strike, they're going to strike far less upon the bodies of white women. And white women's tears are like kryptonite to white men sometimes. You know, they can be weaponized. So I'm encouraged when I see white allies using that in a place that is so white, right? And when we have white women like Melania Trump, or we got white women like in their mom outfits and their yellow shirts, and they're just like on that front line, it's such an interesting and sad dichotomy to witness, right?
Truly.
Within the
I mean,
same demographic of people.
And I'm with you, Desiree. I mean, I am super encouraged and appreciative of the thousands of white folks that have taken to the streets of Portland and in other places. But Portland is where, you know, it's almost like this white on white crime dynamic, so to speak, where it's the white crowd versus like the white police force. And it's like, oh man, we don't see this that often now, do we? But, you know, Jen and Johnny, I just think about how different that would look if that was in Chicago or Detroit or in Baltimore, and it's thousands of Black people or brown people. And then historically, for your folks, where there were insurrections and uprisings where tribes were like, fuck this, this is not the way that this is going to go. And they were responded to with utmost force and violence, and murder and punishment, and just the most inhumane things that you could do to people has been done to Native people on this land when they have stood up in the way that these white protesters are standing up now.
Yeah, when I was watching some of the videos out of Portland, one, it brought back for me just being out in the streets covering some of the protests here in DC, late May, early June was when I was out covering them, and just the tear gas just being thrown indiscriminately everywhere, so it brought that back, and it did bring back a bit from Standing Rock for me. I don't know. I feel frustrated because it's like, great, I'm glad white people are out here doing this. They should be out there. But at the same time, why should it take it being white people or white people with power, like the mayor of Portland, being tear gassed for suddenly the rest of the country to give notice and care? It's horrible. It's horrible. No one should go through that. But up until, relatively recently, for the most part, white people have not suffered this fate. Now, working class, union members, more rural white people, they have been through some shit in their time at the hands of the U.S. government. I mean, just look at all the coal mining, labor rights wars in West Virginia and Kentucky and so forth. Like, it's always happened, but not at the same rates at which it's happened to like Native, Black, and brown, and people of color communities. It shouldn't take a white person saying, "Oh God, tear gas is worse than I realized. This shouldn't happen." Like, why weren't you listening to Native, Black, and brown folks for a long ass time? Like, we've been saying this. Like, it's just infuriating.
64% of white women voted for Trump. 64% of white women.
And I do want to say, just kind of like piggybacking a bit off what Desiree said, like, yes, white women's tears have a hell of a lot of power. I do want to note, though, that about half of law enforcement officers are domestic abusers. So they're going home and they are abusing the women in their own homes. And some of those women are white women. So I do want to point that out, that, the same system that these white women uphold is also doing them harm too. Mm. I'm not crying a river for them, but at the same time, for me, it's like, it's the system. Black and brown, indigenous folks, like, we've been getting it the worst for the longest. But I think the fact that white people on a larger scale are now getting a little taste of that is proof that this is a system that is inherently fucked up and flawed, that is inherently only meant to serve a very tiny portion of the population in the world. And it's really meant to create and hoard wealth. And anyone who gets in the way of that process will be collateral damage.
Mm-hmm. And I just women are starting to. I would just like to say that I am crying no tears for the mayor of Portland, and I really hate that he has kind of stolen the spotlight, because now people are like, how dare the president allow a mayor to be tear gassed? But can we not? Have we forgotten that for the last 50 days, he has allowed his own police force to tear gas protesters day after day, and all of a sudden he goes out for a photo op? I think that he was there specifically to try and get that picture in of victimhood to, kind of throw a jab at Trump, kind of like hoping that nobody realizes, like, oh crap, I'm doing the exact same thing, but you know what? Forget about me. Let's worry about Trump. Because as soon as he left, as soon as he was tear gassed, and if you watch the video of this, you hear people telling him, you did this to us first. Like, you hear them chanting and calling him out as he's walking away. And as soon as he leaves, his own police, along with those federal police, working together, declared a riot and started attacking the protesters. And yet, all of a sudden, the media is painting him as this poor mayor who was victimized, who was tear gassed by Trump's henchmen. And it's so infuriating to me because it's like, well, wait a second. He's just as bad as Trump in this because he has allowed his police force to run rampant, to abuse the citizens of Portland for over 50 days straight without saying a word. But all of a sudden, because Trump sends in his federal police, then here he is trying to play the victim. It is just so infuriating. And I'm like Desiree and Jen said, like, I'm glad more white people are out there putting their bodies on the line, because for so long we have bore the brunt of all the abuse in this country and the injustice. And we've had to fight just to get allies. We've had to, coddle them. We've had to bring them in slowly for the most part. And it puts so much more emotional labor on us when they should be just doing this anyway, because it's the right thing to do, to stand up for Black and Native rights, to stand up for marginalized people who are being hurt. It's the right thing to do, and they should be able to do it, no questions, nothing in it for them. But, I'm glad that they are finally out there putting their bodies online, getting a little taste of what we've had to deal with, because now they're starting to realize, like, oh, the Native people, they couldn't just be more polite. They couldn't just be more compliant. It's this whole system that is messed up. It's so infuriating that it's taken all this for them to start seeing this. But, at least I'm glad that they are, because now it means that they're more aware that this impacts them too, that they are not immune to the abuse and the injustice that we are faced with just because they're white. This system is coming after them now. Like, it's kind of funny because, Native and Black people have told them, if they will do this to us, they will do it to you too. And now they are. So I am really glad that white people are kind of waking up and being willing to put their bodies on the line too, because that's what it's going to take for us to create change.
Absolutely. And I am still in confusion how the mayor of Portland is also the police commissioner. Maybe one day somebody smart will explain that to me, because I'm like, the fuck? He's what? Okay, cool. That must be some West Coast stuff. Hey, ladies, we are a little short on time. We're actually a little bit in overtime here. But before we sign off, I wanted to pitch it to Jen, because what we're coming up on an interesting anniversary here, Jen, of is it the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, which was signed into law by H.W. Bush. Was that right? First Bush, Bush 1. Probably the only decent thing he probably has ever done in his whole stinking life was to sign into federal law rights for the disabled. And even as we approach the significant anniversary, it's not all good for the disabled community. Jen Water, talk to us about that.
So I'll try to do this as briefly as I can. Sunday's the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I was, I believe, 12 years old when that was signed into law. Before the ADA, a good number of people with disabilities were just tossed into nursing homes and institutions, because it was said, oh, well, your home's not disability accessible. The workplace, the community at large is not accessible. So we're just going to throw you in an institution. And that does still happen quite a bit. I myself, even as recently as like about 3 months ago, have had people in the healthcare industry and social workers and such try to put me in a nursing home rather than just making sure I have a disability accessible home and a home health aide. You know, there's no reason for me to be in a nursing home, but there's just this attitude that we throw disabled and chronically ill people away because we have no value. So ADA has done a lot of great work. It has brought a lot of good protections, but by no means is it even close enough to what most communities need, especially when you factor in how racism and colonialism also impacts the issues of disability and chronic illness. That's really important. So I really want to try to encourage everybody to look into the news coverage and the various events that are happening right now around this 30th anniversary. But I really want to encourage you to dig in to events and news coverage that's really by, for, and about Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, East Asian, and so forth. Because just like with many other movements, the voice that is so often heard in the disability justice movement are the voices of white cis men, and white people. And so I was on a panel today with the True Project, which you can see on their YouTube channel. I'll be on another event of theirs, the Town Hall Forum, which you can also watch. That's on Sunday, 4:30 Eastern Time. And then hashtag ADA30 in color. There are essays of 13 disabled and chronically ill BIPOC folks. I'm one of them. And there's a panel talk on Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. That's just a quick, brief glimpse of some of the things happening, but there are so many other events and so many important voices of disabled and chronically ill folks who need to be heard.
Absolutely. And shout out to Alice Wong, who's
Yes.
got a new book out about her experience being disabled, being a woman of color, and the complexities that go in to that existence, being in America. And you're 100% right. When you hear about disabled people, or when you see what stories about disabled people are featured and centered, it's usually, a white man, dealing with Lou Gehrig's disease or something along those lines, and his wife trying to him out, but you don't see the stories of disabled people of color. So this is so important. Thank you so much for that, Jen. Guys, I'm going to let y'all go. It's 10 minutes after 6. It's Friday. I know y'all like, God damn, Kim, let's get on out of here. But before we go, Johnny J, people in the comments wants to know what's up with that shirt, baby, and where can I get one? Show us. Let me see it.
Let me show you. That's my shirt.
Yes. Never say never. Is that what that says?
Never say never, because it happened and now we're saying bye, bye, bye.
And these unoriginal fools can't even come up with a name to replace the slur. So they're going to call the team the Washington football team for the whole season. It's like, wow, y'all really didn't see this day coming at all. They were not prepared to not be called the Washington racial slurs in perpetuity, which says a lot right there. But Jen, Johnny, where can we purchase a shirt, baby girl? Where can we get one?
Oh, well, you guys can purchase this shirt through my website. So you could go to www.johnnyj.com and just hit the shop button. Or you could go to represent.com/store/Johnny-J. And I also have a lot of more designs. And also, while we're talking, one of my partner's friends, her dad needs a heart transplant. And so they do have a GoFundMe. They're trying to raise $10,000. The last time I checked, they were halfway to the goal, because now they have 2 households that are trying to, manage his health care. And he was one of their main financial providers. And so they really do need some help. They're a great family. They don't have a huge online network. They don't have the means, a platform to really get this GoFundMe out there. So all the proceeds from my t-shirt shop are going to their GoFundMe right now. And I do post the receipts for all the donations that I've been making. So if you buy a t-shirt, you're not just getting a cool shirt, you're also helping a really great family and their dad right now who, just really need the help.
And ladies, just FYI going forward, anytime you guys want to amplify anything, this is a good space for y'all to do that. So thank you so much. Johnny J, Desiree Kane, Jen Deer and Water. Again, First Nation Fridays. I look forward to these days and I learn a lot. I know the viewers learn a lot of people in the comments chiming in, expressing solidarity. So I thank you all for sharing your wisdom and perspective with us, because we don't know enough about Native Americans. They're first people of this continent, and everybody else that came after them don't know much about them. And that's a tragedy. But hopefully, as we have these conversations, non-Native ignorance will diminish some, and we'll know more and be able to stand as allies with the Native community. So thank you guys for this. Again, we appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, Wado. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey gang, that's another episode of Stir Crazy. Listen, tune in next week. I will not be here on Tuesday. I am taking off because it is my birthday. Yes, I'm a big girl now, so be sure to tune in. I'm not sure who's going to be sitting in the seat, but it will be an engaging conversation nonetheless, so be sure to do that. Also, do not forget, the coronavirus is still out here jumping on people. It is jumping on people at record rates. Please wear a mask. I don't got to tell my viewers to wash your hands. I hope y'all out here washing your hands regardless. But please don't find yourself in indoor spaces confined with a lot of folks. Be cognizant, guys, because this this country does not have a handle on this virus. And at this point, it is up to us to protect ourselves. Okay, it's us against the world out here. So please, Rona is still out here. Do not play games. Wear your mask. Wash your hands. Have a great weekend, folks, and we'll see you again next week for Stir Crazy. See you later. Bye.